Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our first discussion in 2025 with a focus on Bulgaria. Our webinar series is part of the Engaging Central Europe program of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, which is a non-partisan policy organization committed to the idea that the United States and Europe are stronger together. The Engaging Central Europe initiative supports democratic resilience, electoral integrity, rule of law, citizen participation, and regional cooperation throughout the European Union. And I would like to remind you that today's discussion will be recorded and you can access the discussion later on our YouTube channel, the YouTube channel of the German Marshall Fund. Please write your questions in the chat. Hopefully we will manage to engage with more of them by the end of the webinar. We have approximately 90 minutes, and I would like to introduce our speakers today. But before that, my name is Asya Metodieva, and I will have the pleasure to moderate today's discussion focused on Bulgaria and the United States after the elections, the road ahead. Next week, the United States will officially have its new president. President-elect Donald Trump will move back into the White House on Monday after he officially becomes the 47th president of the country. The inauguration is the most high-profile part of the transition of power between government leaders in Washington, D.C. Critics of Donald Trump point to his unpredictability as a politician and the controversy of figures invited to join his cabinet. Meanwhile, many in Europe hope that he will facilitate negotiations between Ukraine and Russia that may end the war. However, there are also fears that the second Trump presidency will bring more isolation and protectionism, affecting the efficiency of organizations like NATO and a common EU-US approach to security, as well as possibly more tariffs on the EU goods. Since the fall of communism, the United States have been providing substantial political and economic support to countries in Central and Eastern Europe, including Bulgaria, which is in the focus of our discussion today. And this has led to increased democratization efforts and economic development throughout the region. For those who missed the news from Bulgaria, I would like to share them with you. Bulgaria's parliament approved a cabinet led by Rosen Zhelaskov, a former parliament speaker. This process ends months of negotiations on the formation of a coalition government in the country. The center-right GERB party won a snap election in October 2024, which was the 7th in a row held in the state for the past 3 or 4, I would say 4 years. So the talks ended. Now we have a government in Bulgaria, as Bulgaria and the United States both had elections at the end of 2024. Reinforcing their partnership is more critical than ever to counter democratic backsliding, Russian influence in the Balkan region and the Black Sea. And at the same time, with the second Trump administration about to take office, questions arise about Washington's commitments and future approach toward the region, and in particular, Bulgaria. Let me, without further summarizing the political dynamics and situation in both the United States and Bulgaria, introduce our guests. I would start with Elena Poptodorova, who served twice as the ambassador of Bulgaria to the United States. She is the founding member of the Atlantic Club of Bulgaria, where she is a vice president, director for Euro-Atlantic Affairs, and project manager of the Three Seas National Program. Daniel Fried, Ambassador Daniel Fried is a Weiser Family Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council, former US ambassador to Poland, and in the course of his 40-year foreign service career, Ambassador Fried played a key role in designing and implementing American policy in Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union. Ambassador Fried helped craft the policy of NATO enlargement to Central European nations, and in parallel, NATO-Russia relations. So he also helped in 2014 with the West's response to Moscow's aggression against Ukraine. And we'll be happy to hear the broader perspective when it comes to Central and Eastern Europe from him. Dr. Margi Ensign is the president of the American University in Bulgaria. During her presidency, Dr. Ensign has achieved numerous milestones that have significantly advanced the university's mission and reputation. She has strengthened the Center for Information, Democracy and Citizenship, something that we're going to talk about as well in today's webinar. Dr. Ensign previously served as the president at the U.S. International University in Kenya and American University of Nigeria. And our fourth guest and speaker today is Professor Daniel Smilov, who is the program director of and the director of Rule of Law program at the Center for Liberal Strategies in Sofia, and he's also associate professor at the Department of Political Science at Sofia University, St. Clement Ohridsky. He's an annual guest lecturer at the Central European University and author of numerous academic publications in the field of constitutional law, but also he follows closely the political developments in Bulgaria. Welcome everybody. After this very, very long introduction, I couldn't save anything because you have a very, very great contributions to the topic. I would like to give the floor first to Ambassador Poptodorova. Just maybe for our audience, we are going to begin with introductory remarks by each of our speakers, followed by the opportunity for Q&A.
Thank you, Asa. Thank you very much. And it's not just a matter of courtesy, but it's a matter of happy long-time experience that I would like to thank the German Marshall Fund for putting this program together. Actually, like others as well, like a number of major US think tanks, the GMF was very intimately engaged with Eastern Europe. But I would argue that the GMF was probably the most attentive to the Balkan region, also opening offices in our part of Europe. And it has been, as I say, a very important and happy relationship for many, many years. You wouldn't be surprised if I kind of begin this conversation, and I do expect it to be a conversation highlighting different aspects of a complicated topic and a complex moment as well, by emphasizing the importance of the relationship, Bulgaria-US relationship, probably because I had the rare professional luck and privilege to have spent decades of commitment to developing this relationship, explaining it, defending it at times, and definitely trying to see it expand and intensify. Another thing which is that's the dialectics of life. Generations change, memory changes, and I'm afraid that now, 35 years down the road, since 1989, not many things have remained in the public memory, attention, or even knowledge. And one of those things that I want to emphasize is the huge assistance which we got from the US, bipartisan assistance in the very first months, I would say, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when Bulgaria also opted for dramatic geopolitical change, and when both parties, both the Republican and the Democratic parties, were present in Bulgaria to help, and I wouldn't say only their own kind of kindred organizations, but they did go back and forth to all the political parties on the ground to help us begin introducing the democratic tools of establishing a multi-party system. America has always been a key factor in this relationship because, and I will probably be, I'm now choosing words, honest, I'll choose honest instead of blunt or bitter, in saying that the most effective, powerful way of countering excessive, overly imposing and oppressing even influence which Bulgaria had suffered over decades and centuries from Russia in different stages of its own existence, no matter whether it was an empire or a Soviet federation of countries, or even now, which is a Russian federation. The only way of kind of giving an option which is clearly defined, which is well cut, that was by bringing America closer to Bulgaria. And I'm not idealistic. I know that there are no perfect societies, no perfect countries, no perfect people, but I've always sustained in my public engagements that, and that was a simple way to put it, what's good for America is good for Bulgaria too. And that came to be true for a long period of time when we were making our inroads into, as I say, multi-party political system, market economy, especially security, but having the president of AUBG on this team of panelists, I can never fail to emphasize the role of AUBG in particular, but that comes to express the role of America as a soft power. I spent some time in Parliament post-1990, from 1990 through 2001, and I believe that the most important foundations were laid at the time, first of all, by having the enterprise fund begin operation in Bulgaria, which is now known as the America for Bulgaria Foundation. And I think we will be talking about the role of these organizations later on. And then almost just a year and a half or so later, we did have the legislation passed for the establishment of the American University in Bulgaria, which grew to become the stellar establishment of higher learning in the region. What I'm trying to tell our listeners now is that we did we did engage America in practically every walk of life. And I'm not talking about culture and music and all these influences which the Bulgarian people had experienced even before 1989. But coming down to the situation of today, yes, indeed, it's great that we finally have a government now, because the last almost 4 years have been extremely confused and muddy with regards to Bulgaria's posture regionally, in the European context, and I would say also in the bilateral relationship, because there are things to pursue consistently in every sector and in every kind of relationship, but also in the relations with America as well. I think that we should definitely highlight our security relationship, the relations of established among our special agencies, which were all that happened in the new century, in the 21st century, especially after our NATO membership. And the NATO membership, which was entirely dependent on America's approval, most important voice of support, which took a long while for a number of reasons. Ambassador Fried remembers the long and tortuous path we took, and we were, I don't know, what shall we say, partners in crime or comrades in arms, every role you may choose, but we should never forget that it was excessively thanks to this interaction with America that Bulgaria became a NATO member, and this NATO membership was a prerequisite for the EU membership of the country. And again, the NATO membership was the physical, I would say, the existential way of having Bulgaria emancipate itself from past influences. Now, this doesn't mean that Bulgaria managed to carry this process to a clean kind of phase. I would unfortunately indicate, and that will obviously be taken up by other speakers as well. Unfortunately, the last few years brought about a resurgence or a kind of more vocal public presence of groups and political parties and Russian proxies trying to impact the public opinion of less informed and informed general public with regard to the main geopolitical choices Bulgaria made, again, very much thanks to the United States of America. So now we will have to deal with, in Bulgaria, yes, we have a government which is great. There are, of course, question marks about how it will go in the future. Just to say that these are rather strange bedfellows, and my first worry was how would this particular relationship proceed in the future? Relations with the United States of America as a bilateral relationship, and also Bulgaria's engagements in NATO. And if we come to the new phase, political phase in America, this is why the attitude of the new administration, of the President Trump's administration, will be of paramount importance. I would again argue more than for any other country about how Bulgaria's, I wouldn't say kind of return to past times, but how would Bulgaria proceed further? Whether it will be a stagnant period of when it will just sit still and not pursue further with reforms, or whether, supported by its allies and the US in the first place, would Bulgaria will be able to do the last, hopefully, stretch of the road to its full integration in the EU and in NATO through the practical decisions which this new government will have to make. I just threw out a few thoughts, but I'm happy to go back to any of these, including of the very specific type of support which President Trump has had over the years. What kind of groups, public and social groups, have voiced support even much earlier.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this, I would say, review of the past 3 or 4 decades of relationship between the United States and Bulgaria. I would like to now give the floor to Ambassador Fried. I have a few questions based on Ambassador Poptalerova introductory remarks, but maybe to transition to your remarks, to ask about your expectations about how the United States will continue, or whether we're going to observe any shifts in terms of foreign policy, whether it comes to Bulgaria or to the region. The floor is yours.
Thank you. A pleasure seeing all of you. Good news about the new Bulgarian government. I have learned to listen to Bulgarians, and in particular, Elena Paptodorova, over the years to assess Bulgarian politics. With respect to US politics, Yelena said something which I think is profoundly right, and I want to start with that. It's been a generation since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the lessons of the Cold War have faded somewhat. The younger generation doesn't remember it. They don't remember either Soviet domination or, in the case of the United States, it is a most distant memory because the American political culture on foreign policy is more reflective of the perceived experience of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And that feeds what is sometimes, and I think erroneously, called isolationism. But the cynicism about those wars recalls the cynicism in the 1930s in the United States about a US participation in World War I, which was seen as a waste. We were manipulated by the French and British imperialists, and it fueled isolationism. And I'm starting out on this note to point out that the shifts in American strategic thinking are not unprecedented, and they are profound. That doesn't mean that the Trump administration will drop out of NATO. Trump world encompasses a very wide range of options. There are some who are cynical about the Western alliance and dismissive of it. It may be that Donald Trump Jr. falls into that category. At the other end, there's, let us say, Marco Rubio. And I commend to everyone his statement at his hearings. He lauded the American leadership after 1945, and he was frank about all of the problems which have resulted in problems in the United States. A certain interpretation of globalism, neoliberalism in economics, which has resulted, there is a wide consensus well beyond Trump world, in a hollowing out of America's manufacturing base. It was a contributing, though not the only factor, having to do with stagnant American living standards for working class people, which fuels cynicism about the international order and is one of the contributing factors to Trump's America First view. How America First is realized is still up in the air. The early test will be the Trump team's handling of the Russo-Ukraine war. And there I am happy to convey that the signs are better than many feared and almost as good as you could expect. That is, the fear that Trump would quickly do a deal with Putin selling out Ukraine. A kind of Yalta arrangement, though without the excuse of Roosevelt that Soviet armies were already there. A kind of dirty deal over the heads of the Ukrainians is now far less likely. The Trump team is coalescing around something like a ceasefire in place, plus security guarantees for Ukraine. That is a reasonable approach. Notice I say a ceasefire in place and not a concession of territory to Russia. There's a very big difference between the recognition that the Ukrainians may be unable to expel the Russians in the near future and a recognition of actual Russian imperial conquests. But some de facto arrangement which leaves 80% of Ukraine free if it includes serious security arrangements for Ukraine, of which, in my view, the best, the gold standard is NATO membership. Let's be clear. But security for Ukraine and Ukraine's rapid movement toward the EU and hopefully toward NATO, backed up with Europe doing more than it has in the past, but with America backing up the Europeans, that is a reasonable solution. And if the Trump team comes up with it, and I'm not part of Trump world, so this is not an advertisement for my team, that is a reasonable solution. Toward Europe and toward Central Europe, the Trump team wants Europe to contribute more. Their ire, such as it is more directed against West Europeans, particularly Germans. When the Trump team looks at Central and Eastern Europe, they think first of Poland. They like Poland as the good European. The Poles spent a lot of on defense. Trump himself seems to have pretty good associations with Poland. He's got a good relationship with Polish outgoing President Andrzej Duda, but outgoing in the elections in Poland won't produce a successor until June. The Trump team probably doesn't think much about Bulgaria, but they do think that the Central and Eastern Europeans tend to contribute a lot. There will be a fight within Trump world about Hungary. Some in Trump world are totally into Orban and Orbanism. And you don't need me to tell you what that means, but that is not the whole of Trump world. There will be many inconsistencies. There will be much internal fighting within Trump world. Bulgaria, much will depend on Bulgaria's ability politically to actually step up and offer more to the United States, because that's what Trump world will be looking toward. What will you Europeans contribute? Bulgaria has to think of that. But I think that the fears that Trump will pull the United States out of NATO are beginning to fade. So I think there is much Bulgaria can do. Also, don't forget the 3 Cs initiative. Many people in Trump world like it. They may not fully understand it, but I've heard people in the kind of deeper strategic part of Trump world think of 3 Cs initiative as a way to introduce multilateral cooperation to produce free and open spaces in the world and a possible model in other places. So I would say to Bulgaria, be on your toes, come to Washington. I won't speak for GMF, but I know GMF will support you. I will speak for the Atlantic Council. We will support you. You have friends. You have friends. So look forward to the conversation, and particularly learning more from people on the ground in Bulgaria. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Ambassador Fried. Many excellent and very thought-provocative arguments about what we could expect. Now, zooming in and thinking about exactly what Bulgaria could do, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Margie Ensign. So when we think about these shifts in geopolitics, in foreign policy, we are speculating, guessing what to expect. What can civil society, what can education, let's say, do in terms of efforts to safeguard democratic efforts to safeguard, fight against disinformation, because Bulgaria is still very much one of the frontliners when it comes to Russian propaganda, for example.
So thank you, Isa and the German Marshall Fund for putting this together and for the invitation. It's really an honor to be with my distinguished panelists, our 2 ambassadors who have already spoken, Daniel and Elena. I'm still processing all of the thoughtful things that you just said, but let me switch directions just a little bit and talk about, what is the role of civil society in protecting and safeguarding and strengthening democracy, and how can we cooperate in terms of disinformation? I think it's important to remember that universities have always, American universities, and we are an American university with full US accreditation, operating in a Bulgarian context. So we're hybrid. And we are the only university in the world whose stated mission is to educate and prepare democratic and ethical leaders. And it's what attracted me to this very unique and important institution. But American universities in particular have always played a really important role in preparing people for democratic citizenship. I would argue we have much to do at this stage, but America's earliest universities were actually called democracy colleges, recognizing that in a brand new democracy, one of the key roles is to make sure people are educated to be democratic citizens. We've gotten a bit away from that, but the new and returning civic engagement model in the US is one that's critically important, not just for the United States, but for Bulgaria. So what we have been doing out at AUBG, I think, can be generalized to other universities. We take our mission very seriously to prepare people to be engaged democratic citizens. Of course, that happens in the classroom. That's part of what critical thinking is, evaluating what's knowledge, what isn't knowledge, what informs, and what's fake. So that type of academic work is critically important, but we as other universities have taken it a step further and sort of following what Congressman Mitva from the US said, we have to learn how to do democracy. Democracy is not just a concept, it's being an active citizen. So let me just show you some of the projects that we're involved in that I think might be useful for our listeners to hear about. And we hope that one in particular, several of them, we can find additional support for. Let's see. Thank you, Isa, for pulling that up.
Yes, I will just ask our
So
colleagues.
as
Yes.
you heard in the beginning, we in the last few years have really been strengthening our CIDC, the Center for Information, Democracy, and Citizenship. We're now focused in 5 areas. Perhaps the most important in terms of countering disinformation and malign influence is this CID Sensica Disinformation Observatory. We've set up the region's first AI-based disinformation observatory, where we're pulling in the massive amounts of disinformation coming from Russia and other countries, disaggregating it, and now developing ways not only to say, here's what's coming in, but to find ways to respond to it. You'll see under factual media advocacy, we're not only teaching English to journalists, but launched yesterday the Christo Grozev Fellowship. Christo Grozev is one of our most prominent alums. He's one of the people that started Bellingcat. He did the groundbreaking work on Navalny and actually won an Oscar for it. And we are just so thrilled that he has now agreed to work with us in training people to be investigative journalists and to work in this important area. We thank the German Marshall Fund for the platform for youth dialogue and participation, which is university students working with high school students throughout the country and the region, setting up student councils for democracy. So you can see from this slide the different ways that we are encouraging college students and high school students to be civically engaged. And what does that mean? It means taking your knowledge and your experience from the classroom out into the community to work on individual community projects and to bring that work, into a broader audience. So I'm really proud of the work that's going on here. And I have learned from my career, particularly in Nigeria, where we were in very, very challenging circumstances with Boko Haram in our backyard. I learned firsthand when young people who are dissatisfied with democracy around the world get the opportunity to take on very big challenges with the support from a university, they learn, They gain confidence that they actually can solve problems. And I saw firsthand, I've seen firsthand around the world, they also gain the courage to take on societal problems which are so big at this point. And I think this model of civically engaged universities is really important at this challenging time, not only in this region, but in America. So there are really growing voices in the US saying we all need to go back to look at this model again. And this is a key role for universities as civil society actors to be playing. The one worry I have, to be honest, in Bulgaria is that we all know the FARA Acts did not pass in the last government, but we also know this new lobbying act or lobbying law is under discussion again in Bulgaria that if ever passed would have very severe restrictions on civil society organizations, including a university like ours. So we're hoping that never gets out of committee and that going forward, the US government and the Bulgarian government will further support things like our disinformation observatory and really get behind this whole notion of civic engagement by civil society actors. So thank you, Isa.
Thank you. Thank you for this very insightful introduction. And I would like to now pass the floor to Professor Smilov. A few days ago, I read that politicians in Bulgaria are waiting for President-elect Donald Trump to officially return to the White House before making decisions about the coalition. Now we see, though, that the news today show that we have a coalition government formed in Bulgaria, approved by the parliament. My question is how the dynamics and generally the political crisis in the past years in Bulgaria will affect these bilateral relations with the United States. What are, from your point of view, the risks with having new administration in both Washington and Sofia, and also opportunities?
Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a really great pleasure to speak with you and to share my thoughts with the distinguished members of the panel and with the audience. Well, first, I want to say that Bulgaria and the United States have excellent relations, and generally I hope that this will be preserved under President Trump. No matter what I say, so this is my general kind of idea, and this is the angle that I approach the whole issue. I'm going to be focusing, as you said, on the risks, but don't be left with the impression that everything is lost somehow, and these good relationships are going to fall apart in one way or another. But I do think that there are risks, and I'm going to focus on the perception in Bulgaria among political elites and important policy members of what the Trump re-election means to the world. What I'm going to say is not about the Trump administration. Ambassador Fried actually had much more enlightening thoughts on that. But one thing is the reality of the Trump world. Quite another thing is the perception of the Trump administration in places like Bulgaria and Eastern Europe more generally. And some of these perceptions, they might be confused, but I think they're dangerous, and they're dangerous in three directions. So there are expectations that things after the election of President Trump and his stepping in office are going to change in three particular ways. The first one is probably most uncontroversial, and obviously it's true that there will be a change in the policy regarding Ukraine. But as Ambassador Fried also said, it shouldn't be assumed that Trump will just leave Ukraine to Russia without making an effort actually to guard the strategic interests of both Ukraine, Europe, and NATO. Unfortunately, some of the assumptions among important political elites are exactly like that, that now there will be a radical change in Western policy, and most specifically American policy towards Ukraine. And in fact, President Trump is read something like a vindication of the critics in Bulgaria, for instance, of the European and American efforts to help Ukraine thus far. So in a way, some of these critics, they feel vindicated by the re-election of President Trump. They feel that now they have the legitimacy to participate in power. And unfortunately, our new coalition reflects part of this understanding. For instance, it was GERB's position that it will not make coalitions with Eurosceptical and Russophile political parties. But we see that now the Bulgarian Socialist Party, which has a long-standing Russophile position, was incorporated quite easily into the governing coalition. Well, I'm generally on the opinion that it is good for Bulgaria to have a regular government, but I'm just illustrating the shifts of attitudes, how they affect the political process. So incorporation of some of such players, which had been campaigning pretty much against aid, especially military aid for Ukraine, is one of the effects. A second change that it's kind of more difficult to perceive, especially from afar, is regarding anti-corruption matters. Some players in Bulgaria assume that the Trump administration will not be that interested in rule of law and corruption matters, and definitely will not look into the affairs of Bulgarian politicians. Bulgaria, unfortunately, is a country which features seven, as far as I remember, 7 people on the Global Magnitsky Acts list. Some of these people are important politicians, leaders of political parties, former ministers of finance of key parties. So the assumption among particular but influential political elites is that now these people will be rehabilitated in some way or another, that the pressure on them is going to ease, and even actually they might get a chance to exercise some retaliatory measures against their political opponents. So again, this may have nothing to do with the Trump administration and Trump's politics. I'm just saying how it's read in Bulgaria and how some politicians perceive the impact of this phenomenon. And also this has practical implications about coalition making and so on and so forth. Again, if we look at the current coalition government, it includes DPS as a supporting partner. So DPS is actually part of the coalition, and this party, DPS, it has been affected quite significantly by Magnitsky's type measures. The situation is more complex. The party is split in two and so on and so forth. But it seems that before the elections, Gerb, Borisov, and so on, they openly stated that they're not going to coalesce with such partners. And now this is possible. So in a way, the Trump's re-election is read in Bulgaria as a justification for erasing certain red lines that political parties had to coalesce with each other in geopolitical direction and regarding corruption and the rule of law. And these are kind of worrying signals. The third implication, and I will stop with that, some of the more radical political parties, they see the re-election of President Trump as a rally call for an illiberal type of democracy of the Orban variation. And again, it may have nothing to do with Trump, but the echo in Bulgaria of his re-election is read in this direction. And it was already mentioned that in parliament, such radical populist parties, they have tabled legislation, Putin-like and Orban-like legislation, foreign agents, and so on and so forth. And they will push, they will try to push such agenda through parliament. I'm not saying that they have a good chance to do it, but they use the whole rhetoric of this change, world change that the re-election of President Trump, according to them, has created, to say that now we need such type of measures in direction of installing they don't call it illiberal democracy, but actually in substance is something like that. So in my reading, these are the three risks which are produced from the local perception of American political events. These perceptions may be locally biased and imperfect, incorrect, and so on and so forth. But on the ground in Bulgaria, they are a reality because they shape political attitudes and they explain particular political choices, including choices in the construction of the current complex coalition government, which I hope that it's going to last a bit longer than the previous governments, and that it will not fall into the traps that I already mentioned. So these are my opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this introduction, Professor Smilov. Three key risks. I would like to maybe also include our audience here by inviting them to post questions in the chat. This is the start of our Q&A part of the discussion. Please, if you would like to ask our distinguished speakers a question, share it with us in written, and I'm going to read it. From what Professor Smilov said, I would like to also connect to the quote from Ambassador Poptodorova: "What is good for the US is good for Bulgaria too." I see that this attracted also attention by our audience. So in the light of these risks described by Professor Smilov, how do you maybe translate into the new geopolitical and political situation this overlap of interests between the US and Bulgaria? Please just unmute your microphone.
I will always argue in favor of this bilateral relationship because, as I was oftentimes joking while serving in the US, I would every now and then say, ambassadors come and go, but relations stay. I'm ready to go up further the hierarchical line and say that governments come and go, but relations stay. And I think I'm a living kind of witness to that, because for so many decades, this relationship has only gone upward under different administrations. Yes, I know what we're talking about. We're talking of a deep going shift in the paradigm of international order, if you wish. But I continue to believe in what the American system has built, thanks to many generations of Americans, many administrations, many presidents, if you wish. And it is the system that offers benefits. Once again, I will repeat, this is not how should I put it, a blindfold, let's say, admiration or uncritical assessment. I know very well where shortcomings exist in the American system, but I know what are the good practices which Bulgaria can make use of. One very important sphere is, of course, the security area. Again, Bulgaria probably stays out as a most vulnerable country within even the NATO alliance. Even the smaller and closer geographically countries like the Balts, they seem to have more resilience against the risks and threats they're facing today. What Bulgaria doesn't have, and that's a problem of us, it's our own problem, it's the problem of the nation, it's resilience. Resilience to attempts from the outside, but also domestic attempts to divert the country from a path well chosen. And when I speak of resilience, I mean that, of course, it's ideological in the general sense of the word, being conscious of the choices we've made and being able to support them and uphold them and push them forward. This is also, however, resilience of lifestyle, of the economy, of public health, if you wish. And these are areas where a lot of shortcomings exist and which are used by the radical parties to attribute our own failings due to bad governance mostly, and corruption in many ways, but we attribute this to the so-called Western lifestyle. And America somehow steps first. And this is, I'm sorry, I don't want to be considered short-sighted or how should I put it, overly biased, because I'm not. But when at the end of the day, we always come down to what the role of Russia is within the society as well. And this is why I say that we need our allies, we need the European Union, we need Europe, we need NATO, we need the US in order to counterbalance. I'm not saying that we have to totally kind of reject Russia as an interlocutor, as a partner, but it should also be on new terms and on the terms of Bulgaria's national interest as well. I did mention in my first kind of general remarks, which will go in line with what was already mentioned earlier, about why President Trump got a very specific kind of support in Bulgaria. And I think Professor Smilov kind of, he deciphered it in more practical terms, but it was very unusual for anybody, for any country, to have a special society of Trump's supporters started even as early as President Trump's first term. There was no Ukraine then. There was not even no war. So not this very, very barren clash of views and positions. No, President Trump only voiced the admiration and sympathy for President Putin. And that was already enough for this particular group, which will always vie for a special relationship with Russia rather than with the West, to form this kind of a society of supporters. I don't know what happened to these people today. Now they're probably in parliament and in political parties, etc. So this is the problem. This is the thing that we need to do our own homework domestically, which goes through a full and honest reading of our own history. It goes through education. It goes through talking to broader groups of people and explaining that I mean, yes, we recognize Bulgaria's history and we are respectful of it, but we also know where the Bulgaria's interest lies, and we have to go with it. And yes, as I've said in so many words, it is where Bulgaria belongs. It's the EU and it's NATO. We do have a very difficult geography. It is what it is. But I've always believed that the only way to mitigate the implications of such a complex and difficult geography is through your alliances, through your families. And for Bulgaria, these are both the EU and NATO. And yes, it is the relationship with the US. I totally agree that Bulgaria is not in the center of attention of either President Trump or his team. But that's why Bulgaria should be able to deliver more as an ally. And I've always believed that we need to sell ourselves as a good ally of the US within NATO, good ally regionally. And now I'm coming to Black Sea security, which is of interest to the US, especially if we take up the Three Seas Initiative as an American-bred, American promoted plan. So that's what a government should do. But of course, they do deserve their, I don't know whether they will be 100 days of peace and quiet. It may be less than that, but I'll just give, and then I'll stop, a very ironic situation coming back to the new government of Bulgaria. It is true that the majority of Bulgarians wanted to have a government, and we all belong to that large group, 72% as of the most recent poll. And immediately after this government was voted, 58% already said they didn't like it. So you see, it will be a very difficult life for this government, because while, yes, we want a government for sure, we also want to know what kind of government this will be. And because of this rather, how should I say, complicated again, to say, combination of political parties, I'm not sure that this national interest of Bulgaria will be aggressively pursued or put on hold for, I don't know, for as long as this government lasts.
Thank you. This is also engages not that much with the risks, but the opportunities that are based on exactly as you described, bilateral, historically good relations with the US. I see a few questions already in the chat, and I will take the liberty to summarize some of them. But before that, I would like to maybe continue one of the arguments mentioned by Professor Smilov with Ambassador Fried about what is, let's say, what is expected from Bulgaria and Central and Eastern European countries. As you said, the Trump administration generally expects more involvement and more participation from the region, especially when it comes to security. Nevertheless, given all the potential risks, or seeing the domestic political picture, how do you see Bulgaria's more enhanced participation in this regard?
Is that a question for me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. The Trump people will look first at statistics. And I'm not defending this, but this is the reality. They will look at the level of defense spending. Is it above 2%? Secondly, they will look at bilateral trade. Is it deficit or surplus with the United States? So Bulgarian officials need to think about that first. Secondly, they will want to know what Bulgaria can contribute. Now, as I said, the focus of Trump administration efforts will be more on Germany than Central and Eastern Europe. They tend to like Central and Eastern Europe generally. I think Daniel Smilov was spot on right when he said that the ideological relationship between part of Trump world and Orbanism and similar right-wing groups like in Romania, Georgescu, that will be critical and that will probably be debated inside of Trump world. Bulgaria, though, I think will have good interlocutors with the Trump administration in foreign policy. And if it comes prepared to suggest what it can do, not just what it wants, the conversation will get off on the right foot. Now, to be sure, the Trump administration will say and do a lot of things that many, myself included, may find alarming. Canada, Panama, Denmark, and Greenland, for God's sakes. This will constantly come up. And it won't do to dismiss it, but it is probably a bad practice to let that drive you to distraction. It is an operating hallmark of Donald Trump that he likes to throw stuff against the wall, not only to see what sticks, but to throw other people into confusion so he can watch and determine whether he can gain any tactical advantage. Easy for me to say, a little harder if you're the Danish government having to figure out your options. I get it. But it will take cool nerves. So I don't say this with particular enthusiasm, but there will be people in the Trump administration with whom it is possible to work, I believe.
Thank you. I'm reading the questions, and I'm sure that you also have access to them. I would like to maybe engage with the question about Russian attitudes and generally this polarization which exists in the Bulgarian domestic political context. And a question here to Margie and Sain. Talking about disinformation, about efforts of civil society and education to preserve and to safeguard democracy and democratic values. Do you see Bulgaria as resilient? And do you think that in the new political season, with having a new administration in both Washington and Sofia, the question about Russian disinformation will remain as strong as until now?
First, let me thank Ambassador Fried for reminding us not to be distracted and to watch really, the programs and policies that emerge. And I think what you were also trying to say is, thank God we're not in Greenland or Canada, right? And so that we really need to be, very discerning in how we review this. I just want to reiterate a couple things I said at the beginning. I don't think it's controversial to say education is the foundation of a society. So what that education is, what students learn, what values they learn is the foundation. And I would argue again that civic engagement is the core of democracy. That is truly when young people learn, and all the research is behind me on this. Students who are engaged civically understand issues better. So they begin to be more involved in issues. It shapes values, and the research shows over time, those who are engaged are more likely to participate, to be democratic participants. So I think that's a partial answer to your question. I think disinformation is only going to increase as AI expands. That's why we're also using AI to distinguish what's coming in. I think our challenge as societies is to determine what is real and what is fake in text, in images, in talking to each other, right? It's one of the biggest challenges of our time. So I think we all have a role to play in learning how individually, how to discern truth from disinformation. And then as institutions and as universities, not only teaching people how to do that, but to design the tools to counter it. And that's what we're trying to do. So I hope going forward, we will continue to have support from the United States as we do on these big projects, and that it's widely accepted and we are able to expand not just in Bulgaria, but throughout the region. It's not going to go away because of any new elections. In fact, I think it's only going to increase.
And Professor Smilov, as maybe to continue this this question, do you expect different perception of, let's say, Russia, or different way of engaging with Russia coming from the United States that would also have resonance among Bulgarian politicians or some political parties? And there is a question here in the chat about the, let's say, predictability, the level of predictability on both sides, both the US and Bulgaria, pointing to the fact that some figures in the government are already, let's say, quote, captured in networks that are about corruption and political dependencies. So in this sense, what is your prognosis or expectation?
Well, these are very difficult questions. So maybe to start with the second one about well, the corruption networks, captured politicians, and so on and so forth. It is interesting how and why two groups of Bulgarian politicians, which have various types of problems, see the election of President Trump as some sort of inspiration and vindication. And I mentioned already Russophiles on the one hand, and on the other hand, politicians with corruption luggage, let's put it like that. Why people with corruption reputation problems would see the second term of President Trump as a chance? And I believe here we come to this transaction-based type of foreign policy that President Trump is famous for. So if transactionalism is the main game, then politicians with corrupt luggage, they think that they are going to bargain, and they could offer something which is attractive and acceptable to Trump, let's say a hike in the defense budget, or a nuclear power reactor, or something like that. And in return for that, they will get a kind of well, suspension of some sort of sanctions, charges, or different type of measures. In a way, the United States are not going to look very much into things like the rule of law, corruption, and so on, if they could get something in return in terms of deals of some sort of nature. So that's the thinking on the Bulgarian side. I'm trying to explain that. And also, Ambassador Poptodorova, she mentioned this curious fact that Russophiles see President Trump also as some sort of an ally, and this was even before the start of the Ukrainian war. So why is that? It's not only these statements that President Trump likes to make about friendly relationships with Putin, but I think the main reason is slightly different. Russophiles, they believe that President Trump will have a more isolationist type of foreign policy, which will leave room for traditional imperial forces like Russia to have a free hand, actually, in Eastern Europe, or at least their influence could increase. And well, maybe I shouldn't dramatize that much. It's not so much about Russia taking over Bulgaria, but when it comes to energy policy, so there are specific implications. For instance, Turkish Stream, you know, this gas pipeline that is transporting Russian gas to Central Europe, countries like Hungary and Austria. So this was, in a way, a project financed by the Bulgarian government, which was strongly in Russia's interest before the outbreak of the Ukrainian war. But there are many such options for Russian energy projects. And Russophiles feel that if President Trump is not very interventionist in Bulgarian politics, this will leave room for cutting such deals with Russia. So these are quite widespread perceptions, I think, among some Bulgarian politicians. And as Ambassador Poptodorova said, that yeah, it's a Bulgarian homework that needs to be done.
Thank you. Now to Ambassador Poptodorova, in this context, how do you see, for example, the 3Cs initiative or the role of NATO and the EU? Do you think that if Bulgaria is more active, it can actually contribute to the visibility and not only Bulgaria but also the region when it comes to regional stability and security?
I do think we are selling a region. And when I say we, that includes Bulgaria in the first place. We are too, even in those peaceful times when it was very easy to say that what was good for America was good for Bulgaria too. Even in those happy times, I was always trying to sell Bulgaria as part of a region. Otherwise, it's a small market, small territory, and it is valuable as a component of a bigger entity. And especially now with the challenges and the risks that we are facing in the broadest sense of security, that I believe should be the approach. So when I totally share the view that we need to offer something, we need to say that we are credible and we are worthwhile. We carry worth of our own. That should happen within this broader context. We should look at the energy opportunities, which we've already tried to combined with the US energy exports, that should continue, obviously. Of course, defense and spending, and defense spending as well. Offering some production items in the defense field, that can also be a winning kind of proposal. But that's the only way I've always seen it. How should I say, the concept moved from peacetime to wartime, unfortunately, but the approach in itself remains the same. Plus neighbors, plus allies. We have to learn to work with the Romanians in particular, who have been a lot more successful in many ways. Defense again comes to mind, but I was distraught, to be honest, and I did tell this to some Romanian colleagues when they did get their official announcement about the visa waiver, while we get inconclusive reactions. So, and I really don't know how is our process moving forward.
And Professor Fried, maybe to continue this question of security, you mentioned already ways how Bulgaria can be more active in the next 4 years. But what is the most important, the key security issue that Bulgaria has to engage with when it comes to, for instance, Ukraine? We have the Black Sea region as well. In the last months of the Biden administration, we also saw more enhanced interest in the Black Sea region by developing a strategy. Do you think that Bulgaria as a NATO member, but also the other NATO members in the region, have the capacity to, let's say, have their voice heard, given that each of these countries is also dealing with how to say, significant domestic political shifts, both Romania, Bulgaria as well, Turkey as a NATO
Sure,
country?
I get that. Well, Trump, let's look at this concretely rather than abstractly. Trump is apt to push for a settlement of the Russo-Ukraine war. That settlement is apt to involve a ceasefire roughly in place. Putin and the Kremlin have dumped all over this. They've just summarily rejected it. And the question is, are they negotiating for position, or is Putin truly convinced that he's invincible? I don't know, and that's not the topic of this panel. However it turns out, Black Sea security, whether there's a ceasefire or not, will be important. Bulgaria, and if the next government in Romania is, if Romanian politics permits it, Bulgaria and Romania could consult and either individually or together talk with NATO and offer to talk to the Trump administration about what they can do. But I mean, walking in the door and saying, and I'm making this up, but walking in the door and saying, we want to be helpful to you, and we think we can contribute things to Black Sea security, whether it's helping station your forces or contributing our Navy or allowing Ukrainian exports to go through our territorial waters, whatever it is, figure out what it is possible to offer. Now, you also asked about the domestic political climate. It is a general rule that the right-wing extremist parties in Europe, all of Europe, tend to be pro-Putin and anti-Ukrainian. There's no rational basis for this, but there's a historical reason. If the Trump people are pushing for a decent settlement of the Russo-Ukraine war, they're not going to listen to Viktor Orban, or Viktor Orban is going to have to change his tune. They're not going to be interested in the radically pro-Russian right-wing parties of Central and Eastern Europe. I know that Elon Musk says that Alternative for Deutschland is Germany's only hope. Like, I get that. I understand the problem. So the question is not a dumb question. It's a good question. But if the Trump people are actually serious about a settlement of the Russo-Ukraine war, alternative AFD is not their friend. Not this AFD. Maloney is their friend. Okay, a right-wing pro-Ukraine, pro-NATO party. Pro-NATO, pro-Ukraine leader. So you see what I'm driving at. The Bulgarian government can actually work with the Trump administration, and if it does so, it can gain some political. It will be harder for either right-wing or pro or Russophilic Bulgarian parties to outflank the government if it's working closely with the Trump administration. Now, I don't mean to be absolute, and I will defer to Daniel Smilov and Professor Ensign, who know more, and Yelena Poptadorova. I know the least of anybody on this call about Bulgarian politics and what works. So at this point, in the old days, I would have said to Yelena as ambassador, does this work? How do I fix this? And she would have told me how. But you see what I'm driving at. I want to be practical for Bulgaria and how to work with the Americans when we're even more difficult than usual to work with.
Margie Ensign, if you would like to maybe respond to this. Just please unmute your microphone.
Sorry. I think I have three experts here on Bulgaria and Bulgarian-US relations at the diplomatic level. So I'm taking all this in. I hope Professor Fried is accurate in his assessment that there are genuine ways we can engage with this incoming administration, and that we have to distinguish between rhetoric that we've heard so much about, that has a negative impact. We can't just say it was rhetoric, because it already is influencing people. What Musk is saying and doing in Germany is influencing people. So I think we have to acknowledge that. But I think my final comments would be, and it's what Ambassador Poptadorova, I'm sure I mispronounced that, said, we are at a critical juncture in history between so many different perspectives and opposing ideologies. I do think we're at a moment where authoritarianism and democracy are battling. And we all have a role to play in ensuring that the values of democracy remain solid and spread. We all have a role. Diplomats have a role, politicians have a role, educators have a role, and we're going to work hard to do that. We are also at a critical role in how technology will play out. It's a very different world with AI now becoming so pervasive. And we're just seeing the outlines of the impact that they will have on politics, on diplomacy, and on education. So I think we have to stay true to our values and stay very determined and build resiliency in our communities, whether they're the diplomatic communities or for us, the educational communities. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Professor Smilov, there is a question in the chat from one of the members of the audience about the expectation whether the government in Bulgaria will actually manage to produce stability, to remain stable, a hope that you also expressed in your introductory remarks. What does it mean for the bilateral relations with the US, especially given the turbulent geopolitical moment and the times we are facing? If Bulgaria continue to be in this political crisis that has been experiencing in the recent years?
Well, thanks again for the opportunity and for the question. Well, I'm moderately optimistic about this new government. Bulgaria needed a regular government. Maybe this is not, this is definitely not an ideal option. It's maybe even not the best that was on the cards in this parliament, but still it's a regular government that we have. And my hope is that it is going to take the country to membership in the Eurozone. Bulgarian economy is doing very well at the moment. So the country meets all the Maastricht criteria for joining the Eurozone. And one of the strategic goals of the country is to join the Eurozone and adopt the Euro maybe at the start of next year. 2026 is a realistic date. So that's one strategic task that the government has to fulfill. And Bulgaria is in a good position to do it. I also want to say that there is goodwill on behalf of the Bulgarian government to involve in a constructive type of relationship with the US and with the Trump administration. And I'm sure that Bulgarian politicians are thinking of mutually beneficial ways in these relationships, given the change of attitudes also in Washington. Of course, I mentioned already the mixed type of motivations that some of the Bulgarian politicians have, but this is our reality. So we cannot just close our eyes and say that problems such as corruption and so on do not exist, or they do not impact governments and political and political choices. They do, but this shouldn't be a kind of impediment which is fatal for the relationships with the United States.
Thank you. I see many questions in the chat, and unfortunately we won't have the time to ask all of them, but I would like to thank our distinguished speakers for joining the discussion today, for bringing to the table thought-provoking arguments, a lot to follow this year, a lot to look for, and to be aware of when it comes to bilateral relations, politics, and diplomacy. Thank you on behalf of the German Marshall Fund. It was a pleasure to moderate this discussion. And for our audience, I would like to say that the video, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, so you can go back to the discussion if you would like to. Have a good rest of the day and have a good year.